The words hit me like ice water in July. Dad can finally relax now that I've taken care of everything, including Margaret's $50 million. If you're ready to hear this unforgettable story, please hit the like button and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'd love to know how far this story reaches. I stood frozen beside the anniversary cake, a smile painted on my face while my son-in-law David addressed 30 of our closest friends and neighbors. The dining room fell silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of someone setting down a wine glass too carefully. Margaret's china gleamed under the chandelier we had installed together 15 years ago, back when she still laughed at my terrible jokes and insisted on dancing to Sinatra records in the kitchen. 25 years. That's how long Margaret and I had been married before cancer took her 2 years ago this October. Sarah had organized this memorial dinner with the best intentions, wanting to celebrate what would have been our silver anniversary. The house smelled of Margaret's favorite lavender candles and the roast beef she used to make every Sunday after church. But David's voice cut through those memories like a blade through silk. "Robert's been through so much," he continued, one hand resting possessively on my shoulder. His grip felt heavier than it should have, like an anchor trying to drag me underwater. The grief, the confusion that comes with age. It's been difficult watching him struggle with the financial responsibilities Margaret left behind. Mrs. Henderson from next door nodded sympathetically. Pastor William set down his fork and leaned forward with the expression he usually reserved for funeral services. Ellen Trask, who had worked at Margaret's law firm for 30 years, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I wanted to speak. The words formed in my throat like stones I couldn't swallow. $50 million. Margaret's inheritance from her father's textile empire, left specifically to me in her will. Money I had never touched, never claimed, never even thought about using because every dollar reminded me of her absence. "The important thing," David said, his voice growing warmer as he found his rhythm, "is that Sarah and I can provide the stability Robert needs now. We've moved the funds into proper management, set up the care arrangements he'll need as things progress." Care arrangements. The phrase tasted bitter in my mouth. I was 67 years old, not 90. My mind remained sharp enough to design the solar panel array I had installed last spring, sharp enough to balance my checkbook to the penny every month, sharp enough to notice that David had just claimed ownership of money that belonged to me. Sarah squeezed my other arm, her touch gentler than her husband's, but somehow more painful. My daughter's eyes held that mixture of love and pity I had learned to dread. At 39, she still looked like her mother when Margaret was young, all soft brown hair and worried green eyes. But Margaret never looked at me like I was breaking. "Dad's been so grateful," Sarah added, her voice barely above a whisper. "Haven't you, Dad?" The room waited. 30 faces turned toward me like flowers seeking sun. Some held genuine concern. Others carried the careful politeness people wear when they're witnessing something private become public. A few showed the hungry curiosity that feeds on other people's difficulties. I nodded slowly, the motion feeling like it took all my strength. "Yes," I managed, the words scraping against my throat. "Very grateful." David's smile broadened. He raised his wine glass, the crystal catching the light. "To Margaret's memory, and to family taking care of family." The toast rippled around the table. Glasses clinked. Conversations resumed. David launched into a story about the challenges of estate management that made him sound like a saint bearing an impossible burden. I excused myself to the kitchen, my legs unsteady beneath me. The tile felt cold under my dress shoes as I gripped the counter edge. Through the window I could see Margaret's rose garden, the bushes she had planted and tended now growing wild without her careful hands. Behind me, David's voice carried through the doorway, explaining to someone about the complications of caring for elderly parents, and the importance of taking decisive action before things get worse. Decisive action. He made it sound like mercy. I splashed cold water on my face at the kitchen sink. The man in the reflection looked older than 67, gray hair thinning at the temples, lines carved deep by 2 years of grief. But my eyes were still clear, still alert, still angry. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had shifted to lighter topics: baseball scores, grandchildren, summer vacation plans. David held court at the head of the table, Margaret's chair, telling everyone about his latest business success while Sarah served dessert. The evening limped toward its conclusion with hugs and promises to stay in touch. Each goodbye felt like a small funeral. Mrs. Henderson patted my hand and told me how lucky I was to have David looking after things. Pastor Williams mentioned resources for seniors transitioning to new phases of life. Ellen Trask caught my eye and started to say something, then seemed to think better of it. After the last guest left, I helped Sarah clear the table while David took a business call in the study. Margaret's study, where her books still lined the shelves and her reading glasses waited on the desk beside an unfinished crossword puzzle. "That went well," Sarah said, wrapping leftover cake in aluminum foil. People seemed touched by what David said. I dried a wine glass with mechanical precision. Yes. Touched. Something in my tone made her pause. "Dad, you know we're just trying to help, right? David has experience with these situations. He knows what's best." What's best? Another phrase that settled wrong in my chest. "I know you mean well, sweetheart." She smiled, relief brightening her features. Outside, the first crickets began their evening song. Inside, David's voice drifted from the study, discussing investment strategies and portfolio management in the confident tone of a man who believed his own performance. Later, after they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table where Margaret and I had shared coffee every morning for 25 years. The house felt larger and quieter than it should have. But for the first time since the diagnosis, since the funeral, since the long months of learning to live with absence, something besides grief burned in my chest. David had made one crucial mistake tonight. He had mistaken my silence for surrender. He had confused my grief with confusion, my politeness with powerlessness. $50 million. Margaret's legacy, her father's life's work, her gift to our future together. Money that was mine by law, by love, by the solemn promise she had made me keep when the cancer was winning. "Don't let them take what's ours, Robert. Promise me." I had promised. And promises to the dead carry a weight the living rarely understand. The anniversary cake sat on the counter, still decorated with silver bells and white roses. 25 years of marriage, reduced to a prop in David's performance. But the cake would be eaten. The guests would forget. The evening would fade into memory. The money, however, remained mine. And tomorrow I would begin to remember what that meant. I reached for the manila folder tucked beneath the kitchen phone books, the one Margaret had insisted I keep safe. Her handwriting on the tab read, "Important RH" in her careful script. Inside lay copies of the will, the bank statements, the probate documents I had filed away 2 years ago and never touched again. Until now. The papers rustled as I spread them across the table, each page a testament to what David had claimed in front of 30 witnesses. My name appeared on every document, my signature on every form, my legal right to every dollar Margaret's father had earned building his textile empire from nothing. The clock above the stove ticked past midnight as I read through documents I should have memorized months ago. Account numbers, investment portfolios, trust fund details. All of it legally mine, all of it untouched since the day the lawyers had handed me the keys to a fortune I never wanted. But want and need were different words, and for the first time since Margaret's funeral, I needed something more than grief to fill the hollow spaces in my chest. I needed justice. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. It crept in like smoke under a door, filling my lungs before I realized the house was burning around me. 3 months before the anniversary dinner, I had begun noticing small inconsistencies. Mail that disappeared before I could read it. Phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Sarah's sudden reluctance to discuss anything more substantial than the weather or her work at the elementary school. The first concrete evidence came on a Tuesday morning in August. I had been looking for Margaret's reading glasses in the study when I found David's briefcase left open on the desk. Among the papers was a letter from my own bank, addressed to me but opened by someone else. The subject was a withdrawal of $47,000 from Margaret's estate account, a withdrawal I had never authorized. My hands trembled as I photographed the document with my phone, before carefully replacing it exactly where I had found it. The withdrawal was dated 2 weeks earlier. the same day David had mentioned needing to handle some estate paperwork while I was at my physical therapy appointment. That evening, I tried to bring it up casually during dinner. I noticed there was some activity on Margaret's account, I said, cutting into the roast Sarah had prepared. I should probably review the statements more carefully. David's fork paused midway to his mouth. I wouldn't worry about it, Robert. The estate attorney handles all the routine transfers. You know how these things work. Probate takes time, but everything's being managed properly. I'd still like to see the paperwork. Of course, Sarah said quickly, her voice bright with false cheer. David can show you everything this weekend, right, honey? But the weekend came and went with excuses. David was swamped with work. The documents were at the office. The accountant needed to organize everything first. I began paying closer attention to their conversations, the ones that stopped when I walked into a room. I learned to move quietly through my own house, to pause outside doorways before entering. What I heard turned my blood to ice water. He's asking more questions, David said one evening, his voice carrying from the kitchen to the hallway where I stood frozen. We need to accelerate the timeline. I don't like this, Sarah whispered back. He's my father. This feels wrong. Your father is grieving and confused. We're protecting him from making decisions he'll regret later. The money is safer in managed funds than sitting idle in accounts he barely understands. But 47,000? That seems like... Trust me, Sarah. This is what Margaret would have wanted. She wouldn't want Robert struggling with financial responsibilities at his age. At his age. I was 67, not 97. My mind remained sharp enough to design and install a complete solar array for the house the previous spring. Sharp enough to notice when my own daughter and her husband spoke about me like I was already in my grave. The pattern became clearer with each passing day. David would volunteer to handle my correspondence, explaining that he had experience with estate law from his consulting work. Sarah would suggest that perhaps I should rest more, take fewer responsibilities on my shoulders. Together, they wove a narrative that painted my independence as a burden to be lifted, my autonomy as a problem to be solved. I discovered more evidence by accident. While looking for an extension cord in David's car trunk, I found a folder containing photocopies of documents I had never signed, bank forms with my forged signature, investment transfers bearing my name but written in handwriting that looked suspiciously like David's attempt to copy mine. The stolen mail explained itself when I began intercepting the mailman before David could retrieve it. Letters from the bank asking me to confirm transactions, notices about new account openings, statements showing transfers to investment firms I had never heard of, all bearing my forged signature. But perhaps the most damaging discovery came through Ellen Trask, Margaret's longtime secretary who had stayed in touch since the funeral. During a chance encounter at the grocery store, Ellen mentioned that David had visited the law firm repeatedly, asking detailed questions about the estate settlement and specifically about my mental competency requirements. He seemed very concerned about whether you were capable of managing such a large inheritance, Ellen said, her voice carefully neutral. He asked if there were procedures for transferring responsibility to family members if someone became unable to handle their affairs. That night I sat in Margaret's chair in the study, surrounded by evidence of a systematic campaign to steal not just my money, but my dignity, my independence, my very sense of self. The betrayal cut deeper because it wore the mask of love and concern. David had been patient, methodical. He had spent months laying the groundwork, creating a narrative about my declining capabilities while gradually taking control of my financial life. Sarah, my own daughter, had been manipulated into becoming his accomplice. Convinced that her father was too fragile to handle the truth about his own situation. The cruelest part was how they had used Margaret's memory as justification. This is what Margaret would have wanted, David would say, as if my late wife, who had fought cancer with more strength and grace than most people show in their entire lives, would have wanted her husband treated like a child incapable of making his own decisions. I remembered the conversation Margaret and I had during her final weeks, when she made me promise to protect what was ours. At the time, I thought she meant protecting it from taxes or poor investments. Now I understood she had seen something in David that I had missed. A hunger that went beyond love of family, a calculation that reduced relationships to potential profit margins. The anniversary dinner had been David's victory lap. his public declaration that the campaign was complete. In front of 30 witnesses, he had claimed ownership of Margaret's inheritance while portraying himself as the dutiful son-in-law, graciously bearing the burden of caring for an aging, confused father-in-law. But David had made one crucial miscalculation. He had mistaken my silence for surrender, my grief for confusion, my politeness for powerlessness. He had no idea that behind my quiet acceptance, I was documenting every lie, photographing every forged document, recording every conversation that revealed the true scope of his betrayal. The war for my dignity was about to begin, and for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt something besides grief burning in my chest. I felt the cold, patient fury of a man who has been underestimated for far too long. Tomorrow, I would begin to remember what it meant to fight back. I needed to learn more, but I couldn't confront David directly, not yet. The risk was too great, the game too delicate. So I did what I'd done so many times before in my engineering career. I began my investigation quietly, methodically, piece by piece. First, I reached out to Margaret Chen, my unexpected ally and a formidable attorney well-versed in elder law and financial abuse. Our conversations were careful, coded, so as not to alert David or Sarah. Margaret's sharp mind helped me understand the legal contours of the battle ahead. She advised me to gather every piece of evidence I could find. Bank statements, correspondence, legal documents, anything David might have tried to hide or manipulate. Together, we developed a strategy to document his moves without tipping him off. I started by requesting copies of my bank account statements from our trusted financial institution, asking for detailed transaction histories over the past 2 years. David's attempts to divert funds without my knowledge suddenly seemed less like whispers of suspicion and more like a well-structured campaign of fraud. But it wasn't just the numbers that mattered. It was discovering where the money was going. I began cross-referencing company names from the invoices I had found, searching online registries for ownership details. Many led back to entities registered just months ago, with addresses that turned out to be vacant lots or front offices. In the evenings, I dug through discarded mail and found envelopes without return addresses, filled with statements for accounts I had never authorized. Some were investment portfolios labeled with unfamiliar fund managers. Others were payment confirmations for luxury items I would never buy. Meanwhile, my exploration unveiled another surprise: a hidden asset portfolio. Property deeds, trusts, and accounts in different states I never knew existed, all in my name but managed without my consent. I traced one deed to a villa in Florida, starkly out of place compared to my modest suburban home. A quick visit to the county registrar confirmed the address but revealed an absentee manager, renting the property under a shell company. My network expanded when Ellen, Margaret's loyal secretary, became a quiet confidant. She shared with me the details she had picked up during David's frequent visits to the law office, questions about probate rules, mental competency, and transfer of asset controls. Ellen's tip about an anonymous informant among David's staff gave me hope. Whispers of greed and fear within David's inner circle suggested cracks in his carefully crafted facade. Night after night, I cataloged every new detail, every piece of paperwork, every digital trail David inadvertently left behind. I used my old engineering skills for pattern recognition, mapping financial flows and communications like complex circuits. Parallel to my work, I explored more personal avenues. Conversations with Sarah became windows into her changing perception of David. Her doubts, barely masked, occasionally slipped through. Flashes of regret, fleeting worries about her husband's true intentions. Her conflicted messages were tempered by loyalty and fear, but they showed me that the family was far from united in David's cause. My investigation also uncovered recorded phone conversations, some accidentally recorded, others preserved after David mistakenly left his phone on speaker. His voice, once confident and commanding, occasionally cracked with anxiety when discussing the estate transfers, legal hurdles, and efforts to silence dissent. I stored these recordings on a password-protected device, along with scanned copies of documentary evidence. Every byte of information became a weapon, a shield, and a testament to the truth I was fighting to reclaim. But the most thrilling discovery was yet to come. Through a painstaking search of county records, I unearthed a transfer document signed months earlier. one that diverted a significant portion of the estate to an offshore account. The signature was forged, or so my forensic expert confirmed. Yet, this deed was on record, a ghostly attachment to my legacy that David had tried to sweep under the rug. I realized then that this silent investigation was no longer just my battle. It was a war against deceit and theft, a fight to preserve not only my wealth but my identity and dignity. The complexity of the evidence was daunting, the stakes enormous. But with Margaret Chen guiding me, Ellen providing insider knowledge, and my own resolve steel hard, I framed a plan. Part of it was securing financial institutions to freeze suspicious transactions. Another involved discreetly notifying legal authorities without alerting David. Every step required careful timing and delicate execution. More than once I pondered the loneliness of this endeavor. Engaging in a duplicity so close to family was heartbreaking. Yet, it fueled a fierce determination. I was no longer the silent victim. I was an architect of my own defense, constructing a fortress of evidence and alliances. The days blurred into nights, meetings with Margaret punctuating my weeks, phone calls with Ellen providing invaluable intelligence. My old engineering patience served well as I wove together the strands of a narrative that no one could deny. It was a slow, grinding process, but every strand brought me closer to the truth that would one day be laid bare when the lawyer read. And David, he'd nearly fainted. More days passed as I quietly expanded my investigation. With Margaret Chen's guidance, I contacted other financial institutions, requesting archival data on accounts linked to my name and estate. Several accounts appeared with no explanation, their purpose shrouded in legal jargon and complex ownership structures. One account in particular stood out. A trust fund established a few years ago in a jurisdiction famous for secrecy and limited transparency. Attempts to gain access were met with delays and stonewalling. Determined, I requested a forensic accountant's assistance. His detailed reports uncovered irregularities, unauthorized transfers, phantom expenses, and a network of shell companies tracing back to David's known associates. At home, I installed subtle security measures. Cameras in discreet locations, voice recorders hidden in common areas became my silent witnesses. I was vigilant yet invisible, piecing together evidence from behind a carefully maintained facade. Simultaneously, I befriended neighbors and family acquaintances, gently probing for information, listening carefully for whispers of discontent or rumors that confirmed my suspicions. One evening, a neighbor mentioned overhearing arguments from David's study, harsh words about money and control, threats thinly veiled in husbandly concern. Through each of these fragments, a clearer picture emerged. David's ambition was not limited to managing Margaret's estate. He sought to control it entirely, erasing my presence and legacy in the process. Sarah's silence, I realized, was born of fear and manipulation. We were not merely navigating family disputes, but a sophisticated campaign to rewrite history and seize power through guile and subterfuge. I documented everything. Detailed notes, audio files, photographs of documents, every piece painstakingly archived with date and context. This digital ledger was my insurance policy, my shield against the lies bred in my absence. Every discovery emboldened me, reigniting fires I thought had died with Margaret. She had been my rock in life. Now her memory fortified me in this unseen battle. Despite the emotional toll, hope flickered. I felt the grip of control loosening around David, as if his empire of deception was gradually unraveling. The waiting game was arduous. Legal consultations with Margaret Chen stretched on, her advice clear but cautious. Timing was everything in a battle where exposure could lead to retreat or retaliation. The days were long, the nights longer, yet I remained steadfast, knowing that each piece of evidence I gathered was brick by brick building a fortress I could not only defend but use to reclaim my life. When the moment came for the lawyer to read the truth aloud, it would not just be a revelation, it would be a reckoning. And David, he would indeed almost faint. The time had come to strengthen my position. The silent investigation laid the groundwork, but now I needed to build defenses so solid even David's cunning could not crack them. Margaret Chen was firm in her advice, speed without haste. We began sealing the gaps David had exploited. My first move was to open a secure, exclusive account in my name alone, with strict oversight and multi-level authentication. This was not just about protecting funds, it was about reclaiming control. Together, Margaret and I prepared the necessary paperwork for legal protections, trusts, power of attorney adjustments, and clear directives that would limit the transfer of any assets without my explicit consent. Every document was crafted with precision to withstand legal challenges. To David, these bureaucratic movements might have seemed routine, but they were chess moves on a much larger board. I moved assets quietly, transferring some funds into protected accounts beyond immediate reach. I ensured that all property deeds were transferred into a trust overseen by Margaret's office. My movements were careful, calculated. I set up legal notices that would alert me immediately to any attempts to alter my financial landscape without authorization. Aside from finances, I focused on my living situation. Anticipating further conflict, I scouted a safe, comfortable apartment nearby, ready to move if necessary. This Plan B was more than precaution. It was a statement of independence. Meanwhile, I continued strengthening my alliance with Ellen. She had newfound courage and was willing to provide more than just information. She agreed to document David's visits and behaviors discreetly. We installed subtle security cameras in common areas and began documenting suspicious activities with timestamps. Each video clip was stored securely, ready to be presented as evidence when the time came. Professionally, Margaret Chen introduced me to consultants experienced in elder asset protection. They conducted risk assessments and advised on further steps to solidify my financial stronghold. Financial advisors worked discreetly to place limitations on large transactions and monitor unusual patterns. I was no longer a passive observer, but an active guardian of my estate. The complexity of these tasks demanded much of my time, but I embraced the challenge. My engineering background provided the patience and attention to detail needed to oversee this multifaceted approach. During this period, Sarah's attitude shifted subtly. She began questioning David more openly, albeit still cautious. Our conversations grew more honest, a tentative bridge forming between us. At one such discussion, she confided, "Dad, I worry sometimes. David's plans seem overwhelming. I want to believe he has our family's best interests at heart, but I don't know." I responded carefully, "Sarah, you're not alone in feeling that way. Trust in yourself as much as you trust others." The emotional weight of the situation was heavy, but every small step forward was a victory. I spent evenings drafting detailed personal journals, recording my experiences and reflections. These writings provided clarity, a mental anchor amid the storm. The stage was set. My defenses were ready, my support network growing stronger. I was prepared to face David's next move, not with anger but with resolve and strategy. This was more than a battle over money. It was a fight for truth, dignity, and the legacy Margaret had entrusted to me. With every document signed, every account secured, I reaffirmed my commitment to protect what was mine, to reclaim my life, and to confront the betrayal that had threatened to consume us all. Tomorrow was coming, and with it, the reckoning. But I couldn't stop there. The battles ahead would test every fiber of my resolve. I intensified consultations with Margaret Chen, delving deeper into estate planning options. We explored establishing irrevocable trusts to protect assets from any further attempts at misappropriation. In tandem, I coordinated with private investigators to discreetly monitor David's activities outside the home. Details of unexplained meetings and cash flows began to surface, painting a broader picture of his intentions. To secure my home and personal safety, I worked with security experts to upgrade systems. New locks, alarms, and surveillance were installed with the utmost discretion. Financially, I restructured investments to diversify risk, moving holdings into low-volatility assets less susceptible to impulsive decisions. The legal parries extended beyond paperwork and accounts. I prepared for potential family court proceedings, knowing David might attempt to question my competency to assume control. Margaret reminded me that perception was as important as evidence. I needed to maintain my health, vigilance, and appearances to counter any claims of incapacity. This meant regular doctor visits, staged as routine health checkups, to build a documented record of my sound mind and body. Sarah, increasingly torn, began attending these appointments with me, a subtle but crucial realignment in our fractured relationship. Every action was a calculated move in a game where missteps could mean losing everything. Amid these maneuvers, I found solace in small victories. A letter from the bank confirming my exclusive control of several accounts. A message from Ellen with timestamps of David's suspicious visits. A quiet dinner with Sarah where trust began to mend. Margaret's unwavering support anchored me through sleepless nights and cautious days. Each success fortified my spirit. The path ahead was daunting, but I was no longer a victim. I was an active defender of my legacy, prepared to face the escalating conflict with clarity and resolve. In this fight for what was rightfully mine, the preparation was everything. And I was ready. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also opportunities. The story was far from over. Every document I signed was a brick in the fortress I was building, not just of defense, but of assertion. I was no longer merely preserving, I was reclaiming. The narrative was shifting, and I felt the tides nearing their turn. My days became a blend of legal discussions, security assessments, and emotional recalibrations. Each meeting with Margaret Chen reinforced my confidence, while every recorded clip Ellen provided sharpened my evidence. Sarah's gradual awakening filled a space I thought was lost forever. Her quiet questions about David were small victories, the soft openings through which trust might someday flow freely again. Even as I prepared for the looming confrontation, I found moments of peace in memories of Margaret, her voice, her laughter, her resilience. These moments became a quiet charge, fueling me. I was ready. The preparation had been rigorous, relentless. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of the reckoning, the moment when truths long hidden would finally be spoken aloud, and David's empire of deceit would begin to crumble. Late one afternoon, as I reviewed my meticulously compiled files, a calm determination settled over me. I was no longer the man brushed aside at family dinners. I was a force preparing to reclaim everything. I crafted a letter to the bank, officially notifying them of my concerns and requesting heightened scrutiny on all transactions. A copy went to my attorney, Margaret Chen, securing our stance. Every phone call with Margaret reaffirmed our strategy. Every new piece of evidence added weight to our growing case. My private meetings with security experts and financial consultants, though exhausting, underscored the seriousness of my resolve. Sarah's tentative support was heartening. Her presence at the latest family medical appointments felt like a bridge repairing days of distance and doubt. I felt a quiet but fierce empowerment. Whether the battles ahead were fought in boardrooms, courtrooms, or family rooms, I was ready. I understood that winning this fight meant more than money. It meant restoring my dignity and healing fractured bonds. Even in moments of solitude, I smiled at Margaret's favorite garden, imagining her watching over us, proud and unyielding. With my plans laid, my allies ready, and my spirit unbroken, I awaited the next steps. The coming days would not be easy, but they would be mine. The tension at home was thick enough to cut with a knife. David's bravado grew bolder. His carefully constructed facade of concern slipped when he grew impatient with my silence and quiet resistance. He began confronting me more directly at family gatherings, his tone sharp, edged with barely concealed threats. "Robert," he said one evening, his eyes narrowing as Sarah poured wine, "we both know you can't manage this alone anymore. Maybe it's time we consider a conservatorship so your affairs are truly in order." The word hung in the air like a guillotine waiting to fall. The implications were clear. If David succeeded, I would lose all control legally. My voice silenced. I met his gaze steadily, deliberately. "I appreciate your concern, David, but I am very much in control of my affairs." His smile was cold. "We'll see." At family dinners, the atmosphere charged with unspoken accusations. Even Sarah, torn between loyalty and growing doubts, could not keep peace between us all. The once warm conversations became chess matches of veiled barbs and strategic silences. One night, I overheard David telling Sarah, "You have to understand, if this goes to court, we need to be ready to demonstrate he's not fully capable." Sarah looked uneasy, but said nothing. In the days that followed, David's threats escalated. He openly discussed restricting my access to funds, controlling medical decisions and isolating me from friends and allies. I confronted him once, asking pointedly, "Is this about my well-being or about control and money?" His mask faltered for a moment, a flicker of anger or fear before he answered, "It's about doing what's best for you and the family." The duplicity was obvious. Despite the pressure, I revealed to David in measured tones that I knew about his hidden transfers, intercepted mail, and attempts to forge my signature. That I had gathered evidence, including recorded conversations where he spoke of these plans. His composure shattered briefly. He was visibly shaken but masked it quickly. The fight was no longer covert. We were on a collision course. Family meetings grew more frequent, often convened by David with Sarah's reluctant participation. The conversations were acrimonious, accusations flying beneath the surface of polite language. During one particularly heated argument, Sarah stood beside me, her voice firmer than I had heard in months. "David, this isn't just about money. It's my father's dignity you're attacking." David's rage was thinly veiled. "You're blinded by loyalty. You don't see the bigger picture." The tension reached its peak when David attempted to hasten a legal proceeding to gain conservatorship over me. Margaret Chen and I intervened swiftly, filing objections and preparing for battle. I began attending support groups for elderly individuals facing similar family struggles, gaining strength from shared stories and advice. The solidarity was empowering. Amid the chaos, moments of kindness shone through, especially from Ellen. She continued feeding me insights and encouragement, reminding me that this was a battle I could win. The home felt like a war zone, but I held the upper hand in knowledge and resolve. The stakes were higher than ever. The fight for my autonomy and inheritance was no longer a quiet defense. It had become an all-out war. And while David pushed forward with threats and aggression, I prepared my counterattack with patience and unyielding determination. Tomorrow, the truth would come closer to the surface, and David's carefully built facade would tremble accordingly. The pressure seeped into every corner of my life. David's manipulations increased in boldness. His family meetings transformed into arenas where loyalty was tested and alliances fractured. Small jabs and cutting remarks replaced conversations. I faced veiled ultimatums more often, thinly disguised as concern. "Robert," David told me once in the kitchen, "this isn't easy for any of us. Your well-being is the priority, even if it means tough decisions." The undertone was chilling. Concede or lose everything. I refused to be cowed. Quietly, I strengthened my contacts. Legal documents were tightened, financial controls heightened. My network of allies expanded. Sarah's internal struggle was evident. Often I caught glimpses of doubt flickering behind her eyes, mixed with fear and love. I took every opportunity to speak with her, planting seeds of truth and encouragement. One evening, she confided softly, "Dad, I want to believe in David, but I also want to believe in you." That fragile admission was a breakthrough, not just for us, but for the battle ahead. Tensions erupted into a family confrontation that no one could ignore. David accused me of being detached and unwilling to accept help. I countered by revealing documented evidence of his covert transactions. The room crackled with raw emotion, anger, betrayal, and pain. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind, reminding me to remain calm and strategic. Support from friends grew too. Neighbors discreetly offered assistance. Some shared stories of similar struggles, reminding me I was not alone. My resilience strengthened with every setback and every small victory. The stage for the upcoming revelations was set. I was prepared to expose the truth, and David's facade would begin to crumble. One day, as Sarah quietly helped me organize some papers in the study, she paused and said, "Dad, I want you to know, I'm beginning to see things differently. David's been controlling, and I'm scared about what might happen. But I'm here now. We'll face this together." Her words anchored me amidst the storm. With her at my side, I felt braver, stronger. David's attempts to isolate me were failing. Together, Sarah and I devised subtle strategies to communicate without David's interference. Secret messages hidden in emails, coded phrases during phone calls, quiet meetings in the privacy of Margaret's garden. Each shared secret was a finger point in the direction of freedom. The family's foundation was cracking, but this made me more determined. With the legal shield Margaret Chen provided and the growing family support, I was prepared to face the next stage. Every day brought new challenges yet, also new hope. The reckoning was inching nearer, and when it arrived, David would find himself exposed and powerless. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late September. David had arranged what he called an intervention with Pastor Williams and Dr. Morrison, my longtime physician, present as witnesses. The dining room felt like a courtroom, with David as both prosecutor and judge. "We're all here because we care about Robert," David began, his voice heavy with manufactured concern. "But we can't ignore the signs anymore. The confusion, the paranoia, the inability to manage complex financial matters." I sat quietly in Margaret's chair, watching the performance unfold. This was David's final gambit, his attempt to publicly establish my incompetence before moving to seize legal control. Pastor Williams shifted uncomfortably. "David, I've known Robert for 15 years. He seems quite lucid to me." "That's the thing about these conditions," David replied smoothly. "They come and go. Robert has good days and bad days. But the bad days are becoming more frequent." Sarah sat across from me, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. The moment had arrived when she would have to choose sides. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. "I haven't observed any cognitive decline in my examinations." David's jaw tightened. "With respect, doctor, you see him for 20 minutes every 6 months. Sarah and I live with him. We see the day-to-day reality." That was when I decided to speak. "The day-to-day reality," I said quietly, "is that David has been systematically stealing from Margaret's estate for over a year." The room fell silent. David's face went white, then red. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," he said, his voice rising. "These paranoid delusions, these accusations." I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew the folder Margaret Chen had prepared. "Would you like to see the bank statements, David? The ones showing unauthorized withdrawals? Or perhaps the forged signatures on investment transfers?" David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Or maybe," I continued, standing slowly, "everyone would be interested in hearing the recordings of your phone conversations discussing how to move quickly before I started asking questions." Sarah gasped. Pastor Williams leaned forward. Dr. Morrison's eyebrows shot up. David tried to recover. "Robert, you're confused. You're taking normal estate management and turning it into some kind of conspiracy." $47,000, I said, placing the first document on the table. "Withdrawn on August 15th while I was at physical therapy. Your signature on my account." David's face had gone gray. That was for estate taxes. Estate taxes were paid from the designated account in February. I placed another document down. "This withdrawal went to Sullivan Consulting. Your company, David, your personal account." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "David, is this true?" He looked at her, then at me, then back at her. For the first time since I'd known him, David Sullivan was completely speechless, and I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for his world to fall apart the same way mine had been systematically dismantled for the past 2 years. The reckoning had finally arrived. The room was heavy with silence, the kind that presses in and refuses to relent. David sat slumped in Margaret's once pristine dining room chair, the weight of revelations pulling him deeper into defeat. He looked like a man caught in a storm without an umbrella, disoriented and exposed. Sarah's eyes rained tears. Her lips trembled as she tried to reconcile the husband she thought she knew with the man now unmasked before us all. Pastor Williams cleared his throat and glanced at the scattered documents on the table. "We are gathered here not to condemn but to confront the truth," he said softly, his voice both steady and somber. "Truth has a way of freeing those it touches." The lawyer, Margaret Chen, stood and addressed the room. "These documents, recordings, and testimonies form an unassailable case. All funds diverted, signatures forged, and actions taken without Robert's knowledge are evident." She pointed to a folder where the final document sat. a notarized declaration signed by witnesses detailing the extent of David's manipulations. The evidence was irrefutable. David swallowed hard. "Please, this is a misunderstanding," he stammered, but his words lacked conviction. A misunderstanding that stole from a grieving man and attempted to strip him of his dignity? Margaret retorted. "There can be no excuse." Sarah took a shaky breath and stepped forward. "Dad, I am so sorry. I didn't see what was happening. But I promise I'm with you now. We will fix this." Neighbors, family friends, and witnesses, many had gathered quietly, sensing the gravity of the moment. One by one, they nodded in support, ready to stand by Robert as justice unfolded. Public testimony from trusted friends and professionals validated the evidence. Dr. Morrison confirmed Robert's mental clarity and capacity to manage his affairs. Ellen detailed David's suspicious activities observed during his visits to Margaret's law office. The community's judgment was clear. David's actions were betrayals, and the family needed to heal. Despite David's attempts to apologize and rationalize, the collective disappointment was palpable. Legal measures were swiftly set in motion. Davidson's access to Robert's finances was immediately revoked. Temporary guardianship was granted to Margaret Chen while the estate was securely managed. Social consequences followed. David faced ostracism within the community and church. Invitations ceased, and whispers turned to conversations about trust and betrayal. Sarah, while devastated by the deception, found strength in her renewed bond with Robert. Together they began rebuilding the family foundation, setting clear boundaries and fostering healing. Robert's dignity was restored through the unwavering support of his community and the relentless pursuit of truth. The once fragile patriarch emerged resilient, his voice stronger than ever. He reasserted his role not only as a guardian of wealth, but as the heart of his family. Though scars remained, they were marks of survival and a testament to his fortitude. The lawyer's truth-telling was the catalyst, the moment when deception met exposure and power shifted back to where it belonged. The chapter closed not with vengeance but with justice and the promise of restoration. And as the dust settled, Robert gazed toward the future, ready to lead with wisdom tempered by experience and grace. The lawyer called it the turning point. After months of covert battles and silent sabotage, the truth had finally emerged. Word spread through the community, the church, and family circles. Robert was no longer the isolated victim, but the man who dared to stand tall against betrayal. As the family's closest circle gathered in Margaret's sunlit living room, a mood of cautious optimism took hold. The community, once hushed and uncertain, had rallied around Robert's cause. Sarah, now fully aware of the deception she'd been caught in, became a fierce protector of her father. Her apologies were sincere, her dedication unwavering. The years of manipulation were unraveling, thread by thread. Legal proceedings solidified Robert's regained control. The official documents were amended, revoking David's access and appointing Margaret Chen as trustee, guardian, and protector. David, now stripped of power, faced a legal battle of his own, one marked by suspicion and the weight of his misdeeds. Yet amidst the legal and social fallout, there was a deeper healing. Robert and Sarah began a new chapter built on trust, transparency, and love. Community gatherings and church services took on renewed significance. Robert's quiet wisdom and resilience inspired many. Though the past could not be erased, the future stretched wide with promise. Robert often found himself walking in Margaret's garden, the scent of lavender and roses a balm for his soul. It was here he reflected on the journey, a path marked by pain, perseverance, and ultimate victory. The truth had been the light piercing the darkness. It had exposed weakness, but also revealed strength. And in that revelation, Robert found redemption. The months following the revelation were not easy, but they were transformative. Robert leaned heavily on Margaret Chen's expertise and the steadfast support of Sarah and Ellen. Together, they rebuilt what had been broken. Property titles were consolidated under Robert's name, secure and untouchable. Bank accounts were audited and restored to their rightful orders. Legal barriers were erected to prevent any future intrusion. David's decline was rapid. Social shunning was accompanied by legal repercussions. The man who had once commanded a sense of control now found himself isolated and powerless. But Robert's story was not just one of survival, it was about rebirth. He began speaking at community centers, sharing his experience as cautionary tales to empower others facing similar struggles. The church, once a backdrop of whispered concerns, became a place of healing and reconciliation. Pastor Williams offered guidance that mended strained relationships and renewed faith. Sarah dedicated herself to rebuilding trust, attending therapy and family counseling sessions. Her journey was arduous but filled with hope. Robert, no longer the fragile figure David had painted, was a symbol of resilience. His voice, once muted by grief and manipulation, now commanded respect. He established new traditions in honor of Margaret, including a scholarship fund for local students, ensuring her legacy was not defined by pain, but by generosity and hope. A new chapter had opened, a chapter of dignity restored and futures reclaimed. One crisp autumn morning, as I walked through the garden surrounded by the vibrant hues of changing leaves, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The battles were behind me, the truth spoken, and justice served. While scars remained, they were reminders of strength earned and lessons learned. The family, once fractured by deceit, began to stitch itself anew, cautious but hopeful. I found comfort in selective reconciliation. Those who had shown genuine remorse and change were welcomed back under clear boundaries. Others faded into the past. My daily routine settled into one of balance, tending the garden, mentoring young engineers, and spending quiet evenings with Sarah, now a trusted advisor and friend. The $50 million was no longer just a source of conflict, but a tool for positive transformation, a testament to Margaret's enduring legacy. In the end, justice was not only served in courtrooms or legal documents, it lived in the hearts of those who fought for truth and reclaimed what was theirs. And as the sun set behind the trees, casting a golden light over the estate, I knew that this chapter was truly closed. The courtroom was silent but charged with energy as the final decisions were made. The consequences David faced were no longer hypothetical threats. They were real, tangible, and just. Legal judgments removed his access to any part of Margaret's estate, and he was ordered to pay restitution for the misappropriated funds. Socially, David found himself ostracized. The community that had once welcomed him now treated him with suspicion and coldness. Invitations to church events ceased, neighbors declined small talk, and even family friends distanced themselves. The isolation was a stark contrast to the influence he had wielded mere months before. Meanwhile, Robert's life began to regain the stability it had lost. Control over his finances was fully restored, allowing him to manage his affairs independently. His house, once a battleground, became a sanctuary once more. The separation from toxic relationships brought clarity and peace. Sarah, committed to healing, distanced herself from David, focusing instead on rebuilding her bond with her father. Therapy sessions, both individual and family, became avenues for processing pain and rebuilding trust. The journey was long, filled with setbacks and small victories, but the foundation was being rebuilt. New rules and boundaries were set in place, clear lines that protected Robert's autonomy and ensured the safety of the family's legacy. Robert began engaging with community groups, advocating for elder rights and speaking against financial abuse. The once private struggle had transformed into a public mission. His role shifted from victim to advocate, leading efforts to support others navigating similar battles. Public recognition came slowly but surely. Local papers featured his story, highlighting the importance of vigilance and legal protections. Robert used part of Margaret's fortune to establish scholarships and support programs for vulnerable seniors, turning adversity into opportunity. The legacy once threatened by greed was now a beacon of hope. Through meticulous planning and unwavering determination, Robert reclaimed not only his wealth, but also his dignity and place within the family and community. The poison of betrayal slowly lifted, replaced by an empowered spirit and renewed purpose. As the months passed, Robert reflected on his journey. The battles had left scars, but in those scars rested lessons and a deeper understanding of resilience. The darkness had given way to light, and in the process a new chapter of life was born, one defined by strength, justice, and hope. Recognizing the importance of community and connection, Robert organized gatherings to foster open conversations about elder care and financial security. These meetings brought together families, legal experts, and advocacy groups. His efforts helped build awareness, educate others, and create support systems for victims of similar abuse. Robert's engagement extended into local legislation advocacy, collaborating with lawmakers to strengthen protections against financial exploitation of seniors. Through speeches, workshops, and media appearances, he became a respected voice in the fight for elder justice. Within his own family, the tides had turned. Sarah's transformation was profound. She took active roles in managing the family's finances with Robert's guidance, ensuring transparency and mutual respect. Together, they restored the trust that had been eroded, weaving a stronger familial fabric. New traditions were established. The annual Family Memorial Scholarship became a symbol of renewal, generosity, and remembrance. Robert's story inspired many to confront their own challenges, proving that resilience and justice could prevail over betrayal. Even as he looked forward, Robert never forgot the lessons learned or the battles fought, honoring Margaret's memory with every step. On a calm afternoon, Robert sat in the garden with Sarah, reflecting on the past trials and the newfound peace. The distance that once divided them had shrunk, replaced by understanding and mutual respect. They vowed to protect not just their wealth, but the family legacy with vigilance and care. The pain from past wounds lingered, but no longer dictated their path forward. Instead, they embraced the future with hope and renewed purpose. Robert established a foundation in Margaret's name, dedicated to empowering seniors and protecting families from the financial abuses he endured. Words of encouragement from community members and friends reinforced his commitment. He believed that through awareness and collective action, no family should suffer as his had. The journey from betrayal to justice had transformed him. He was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever lay ahead. And as the sun set behind Margaret's garden, a golden light bathed the estate, symbolic of closure, recovery, and the promise of tomorrow. The financial investigators worked for months, unraveling David's web of deceit. What they found exceeded even my worst suspicions. The $47,000 was merely the beginning. Hidden accounts, phantom companies, and forged signatures painted a picture of systematic theft that stretched back nearly to Margaret's death. David had been playing a long game, gradually siphoning funds while building a narrative of my incompetence. He had even attempted to purchase life insurance policies on my behalf, naming himself as beneficiary, a move that chilled me to the bone when Margaret Chen revealed it during our final legal meeting. The criminal investigation moved swiftly. The district attorney's office took the case seriously, understanding that financial elder abuse was both a crime and a growing epidemic in our community. David faced multiple felony charges: forgery, theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse. His consulting business collapsed overnight. Clients fled when news of his illegal activities spread. Professional licenses were suspended pending investigation. The man who had once commanded respect in financial circles became a pariah. Sarah's divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. With Margaret Chen's legal expertise, we ensured that David would have no claim on any assets that rightfully belonged to our family. Sarah kept the house they had shared briefly, but everything else, every account he had thought was his to control, reverted to its proper ownership. The community's response was overwhelming. Pastor Williams organized a support group for families dealing with similar situations. Mrs. Henderson, my longtime neighbor, became an advocate for senior financial security awareness. Ellen Trask helped establish protocols at the law firm to prevent future manipulation of vulnerable clients. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was watching David's facade crumble completely. In court, the confident manipulator became a desperate man pleading for leniency. His attempts to blame his actions on stress, family pressure, and misunderstood good intentions fell flat before a judge who had seen too many cases of financial elder abuse. The sentence was substantial: 5 years in federal prison, full restitution of stolen funds, and a permanent restraining order preventing any contact with our family. His financial advisor licenses were permanently revoked, and his name was added to databases that would prevent him from ever again working in positions of financial trust. Justice, when it finally arrived, was thorough and complete. Sarah and I used the recovered funds to establish the Margaret Morrison Foundation for Elder Financial Security. We funded legal aid clinics, educational programs, and support groups throughout our state. Margaret's inheritance, once threatened by greed, became a powerful tool for protecting other families from experiencing what we had endured. The Foundation's first major initiative was lobbying for stronger state laws, protecting seniors from financial exploitation. Our testimony before the legislature, Sarah's passionate advocacy, and my detailed account of the abuse helped pass landmark legislation that made such crimes easier to prosecute and punish. The irony wasn't lost on me. David's attempt to steal Margaret's legacy had ultimately transformed it into something far more powerful than money and accounts. It became a living memorial to her strength and a shield protecting countless other families. As I stood in Margaret's garden on the second anniversary of her death, I could almost feel her presence. The roses she had planted were blooming magnificently, tended now by Sarah and me together. The inheritance David had coveted was being used exactly as Margaret would have wanted. Not for luxury or comfort, but to protect others and honor the values she had lived by. The $50 million was finally serving its true purpose, not as a prize to be claimed by the ambitious, but as a foundation for justice, dignity, and hope. And David Sullivan, the man who had once declared that money was his, was spending his days in a federal prison cell, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about the price of betrayal. Sometimes justice tastes sweeter when it's been a long time coming. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the scent of rain and renewal. Life after such trials was not a return to what had been, but a fresh beginning shaped by pain, resilience, and hope. I embraced a new rhythm, one marked by quiet mornings in Margaret's garden, afternoons spent consulting young engineers eager to learn, and evenings discussing future plans with Sarah. Her transformation from hesitant daughter to steadfast ally was one of the most rewarding victories. We established a system of clear boundaries and conditions. While love remained a foundation, trust was earned anew. Those who showed genuine remorse and a commitment to change were welcomed back into our lives, though always with caution and established limits. For others, the past was a closed door. My life became a balance between reclaiming autonomy and extending grace where it was deserved, recognizing that healing, like justice, is rarely linear. In the broader community, the Margaret Morrison Foundation flourished. It became a beacon for elder rights advocacy, providing resources, education, and legal assistance. Its impact grew as more families found support and strength to confront their own challenges. Sarah's dedication was unwavering. She spearheaded new initiatives, connecting with local schools for scholarship programs and collaborating with legislators to continue strengthening elder protections. Together, we visited communities, sharing our story to inspire vigilance and courage. Our renewed family bonds were not without complexities, but the foundation laid was sturdy. We celebrated milestones with a new sense of purpose, honoring Margaret's memory by living her values, integrity, generosity, and resilience. One afternoon, as I walked the paths Margaret had once tended, I reflected on the journey's paradox. Grief had nearly consumed us, yet it was the catalyst for transformation. The betrayal intended to break us ultimately forged a new legacy. I looked to the future with eyes unclouded by bitterness. The estate, once the ground for conflict, was now a garden of growth and opportunity. Life, I realized, was about more than survival. It was about thriving in the face of adversity and finding peace within the storms. And as the sun set softly beyond the hills, casting a warm glow over Margaret's garden, I felt a profound sense of closure. The chapter was not only closed, it was written anew. But the story did not end there. The foundation of truth and healing I'd rebuilt extended beyond immediate family. Invitations came from communities far and wide, seeking guidance on establishing protections for their elders. I worked closely with Sarah to develop educational programs, focusing on the warning signs of financial abuse and the importance of early intervention. Together, we launched outreach through local media, social platforms, and public events, engaging audiences with our narrative, not as victims, but as survivors and advocates. Our message was clear: vigilance, education, and unity are the strongest defenses. In private moments, Sarah and I reflected on how far we'd come. The scars of the past remained, but were softened by forgiveness and the relentless will to move forward. Reconciliation was possible, but only on grounds built with honesty and mutual respect. I found peace in knowing that Margaret's legacy was being honored not only through philanthropy, but through the restoration of family and community bonds. The estate's wealth was transformed from a source of conflict to a foundation of opportunity. I dedicated myself to mentoring others who faced similar trials, understanding all too well the shadows such struggles cast. My story became a lifeline for many, a reminder that even in darkness light can be found. This new chapter was one of strength, of healing, and of unwavering hope, and as I gazed over the garden where Margaret's roses bloomed, I smiled with quiet gratitude. The past had been hard-fought, but the future, our future, was bright. Life continued, but no longer burdened by betrayal or uncertainty. Instead, each day became an opportunity, a chance to build, to mend, and to grow. The foundation established in Margaret's name became a cornerstone for countless families. Stories poured in from those touched by our mission, those who found courage to stand up against exploitation. Through workshops and community outreach, we reached far beyond our neighborhood, igniting a movement that prioritized respect, protection, and dignity for elders everywhere. Sarah grew into her role with grace and determination. The two of us traveled extensively, speaking at conferences, schools, and community centers. Our message resonated with many. Vigilance is not just necessary, it is life-saving. There were moments of reflection, too. Quiet evenings spent reading letters from families we had helped. Each story a testament to the power of truth and resilience. The garden flourished in the spring sunshine. Roses bloomed more vibrant than ever, each petal a reminder that life, even after hardship, can be beautiful. I often thought about the journey, the pain, the loss, and ultimately the triumph. And I knew deeply that while the path had been difficult, it led to a place of peace that was worth every struggle. The legacy of Margaret, the strength of Sarah, and my own resolve had forged something lasting, something far greater than money. It was the legacy of love, justice, and rebirth. 2 years after the anniversary dinner that had changed everything, I found myself standing in the same dining room where David had once claimed ownership of Margaret's $50 million. But now the room held a different energy entirely. Sarah and I were hosting a gathering for the families who had been helped by the Margaret Morrison Foundation. 23 families from across 3 states had come together to share their stories, celebrate their victories, and support those still fighting their battles. Among them was Dorothy Chen, an 84-year-old woman whose grandson had attempted to force her into a nursing home to access her savings. With our foundation's legal assistance, she had successfully defended her right to remain in her own home while ensuring her assets were properly protected. There was James Rodriguez, whose daughter-in-law had been slowly draining his accounts through forged checks. The evidence we helped him gather led to criminal charges and full restitution of his funds. Each story reminded me that our ordeal, as painful as it had been, had served a greater purpose. Sarah, now 31 and stronger than I had ever seen her, stood before the group sharing her own journey from manipulation to empowerment. Her voice carried none of the uncertainty that had once defined her relationship with David. The hardest part, she told the group, was admitting that I had been manipulated too. But healing began when I chose truth over comfort, when I chose my father's dignity over my own denial. I watched her speak with immense pride. The daughter who had once been caught between loyalty and manipulation had become a fierce advocate for vulnerable seniors across the country. Pastor Williams, now in his 70s himself, served as chairman of our foundation's board. Ellen Trask had become our first full-time program coordinator, using her decades of legal experience to identify and prevent elder abuse cases. Even Margaret Chen, the attorney who had saved my autonomy and probably my life, continued to provide pro bono legal services through the foundation, ensuring that other families could access the expertise that had been crucial to my victory. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone in Margaret's garden, the same space where I had once sat in grief and defeat. The roses she had planted were now mature, their blooms fuller and more vibrant than ever. Sarah joined me on the bench where I often spent quiet moments. "Do you think she would be proud?" Sarah asked, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. I thought about Margaret's final words to me, her insistence that I protect what was ours. But I realized now that she hadn't just meant protecting the money. She had meant protecting our dignity, our family bonds, our values. "I think she would be amazed," I said, putting my arm around my daughter. She couldn't have imagined that her inheritance would become a shield protecting thousands of other families. Sarah leaned against my shoulder, and for a moment we sat in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "What happened to David?" she asked quietly. It was a question she rarely posed, but I could tell she thought about it sometimes. "Last I heard, he was working in a restaurant kitchen in Nevada. He'll never be allowed to work in finance again. But he's served his time and he's trying to rebuild his life." Sarah nodded. "I hope he finds peace, Dad. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from taking things that don't belong to you." Her forgiveness, even after everything David had put us through, reminded me why I had fought so hard to restore our relationship. This was the daughter Margaret had raised, kind, strong, and capable of grace even toward those who had wronged her. 6 months later, I received an unexpected letter. The return address was unfamiliar, but the handwriting inside was David's. "Robert," it read, "I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you don't read this, but I needed you to know that I've been following the Foundation's work through news articles, and I'm amazed by what you and Sarah have accomplished. What I did to you and your family was inexcusable. I stole more than money. I stole trust, dignity, and time you can never get back. I don't ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that your strength in the face of my betrayal has taught me something about the man I want to become. I hope someday to do something with my life that honors the grace you've shown, even to someone who wronged you so deeply. With respect and profound regret, David." I read the letter twice, then showed it to Sarah. We discussed it over dinner, weighing whether to respond. "What do you think, Dad?" I thought about Margaret's garden, about second chances and the difference between forgiveness and foolishness. "I think," I said finally, "that everyone deserves the chance to grow, but growth has to be proven through actions, not just words." I wrote a brief reply acknowledging his letter and wishing him well in his efforts to build a better life. I didn't offer forgiveness or reconciliation. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. But I could offer the hope that people can change, that redemption is possible for those willing to do the hard work of becoming better. Years passed. The foundation grew. Sarah married a good man who understood and respected our family's mission. They gave me 2 grandchildren who played in Margaret's garden and learned, through bedtime stories, about the importance of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. On the 10th anniversary of Margaret's death, we held a memorial service in the garden. Hundreds of people came, families we had helped, attorneys who had donated their services, legislators who had strengthened elder protection laws because of our advocacy. But the most meaningful moment came when a young woman approached me after the service. She couldn't have been more than 25, with earnest eyes and a firm handshake. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "my name is Lisa Chen. I'm Margaret Chen's niece. I just graduated from law school, and I want to dedicate my career to elder law because of what your foundation showed me was possible." Standing there in Margaret's garden, surrounded by the legacy she had left and the family we had rebuilt, I felt a profound sense of completion. The inheritance David had tried to steal had been transformed into something far more valuable than money. A movement, a mission, a living memorial to love, justice, and the unbreakable bonds of genuine family. The $50 million David had claimed was his had become a gift to thousands of families, a shield against exploitation, and a bridge between grief and hope. Margaret would have been proud, and as the sun set behind the roses she had planted so long ago, I knew that the best chapters of our story were yet to be written.